Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. As our regulars know, Chevalier's is the oldest independent bookstore in Los Angeles. We've been here since 1940, and we hope to continue, notwithstanding the current financial crisis. This is an evening I've been looking forward to for some time. It joins a person whom I've known a long time and admire greatly, Ambassador John Emerson, and with an author whose career and interesting, well-written and charming book, Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You, makes me an admirer of her. Let me just first talk about Ambassador Emerson, the interlocutor, whom I've known for 40 or so years, once a lawyer, now the vice chairman of the Capital Group. For those of you who check your 401, you probably have the American funds in there somewhere. Ambassador Emerson got to work as a special assistant to President Clinton. He practiced law at the highest level at a law firm we were both lucky enough to be partners in. And he served his country under the appointment of President Obama as the United States ambassador to Germany, where he made us proud every day that he was our man in Berlin. Ambassador Marshall, who has served President Clinton and served as the chief of protocol for President Obama, is a uniquely positioned person to talk about how the skills and knowledge that she has developed in government are of enormous and general application in the world of business and in law. Her book provides guidelines for social behavior and are just chock full of both prescriptions of what to do and how to do it, and anecdotes which are captivating, funny, well-written, and some of which I'm probably going to ask her to speak about. It's a book that covers really the scope of history, in a sense, starting with the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War, moving on to the coronation of Charles II, and going from there to watch the country and the world grow, and stopping off at little personal items like a golf lesson from President Clinton, a challenge, how long one can speak to an ambassador in a line because the President of the United States has to go to the men's room, and a general sense that there are rules to be followed, with the overriding rule being there's no substitute for preparation. The book is positioned in a traditional Washington way with a surprise. It has a lengthy index, which I am told by my friends who spent time in Washington is the first place any Washingtonian starts, checking to see whether he or she is mentioned. It then has acknowledgments where if you're not mentioned in the index, at least perhaps you're mentioned in the acknowledgments. But this book has a trick, which is it has an appendix which contains an unbelievable list of information and array of rules, ranging from which cheek you kiss someone in Belize to how you bow or not, whether you curtsy, and the general rules of the road for being in a business environment or in a diplomatic environment. So it's with great excitement that I turn it over to Ambassador Emerson and invite his discussion with Ambassador Marshall. And I know everybody will enjoy this evening. Thank you all for being here. Ambassador Emerson?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Bert. And it's great to see you virtually. And I just think it's so wonderful what you have done and your partners with Chevalier's. It's so important to support these independent bookstores, and they really are sort of iconic parts of our community. So thank you very much for doing that and for having us all here and inviting us. And Capricia, it's just so great to see you. As always, you know, Bert sort of gave the biographical piece. What you may not know or understand is Capricia was from day one in the Bill Clinton White House, one of the top 3 people who were advising Hillary Clinton, who broke every mold imaginable as First Lady. And that was an extraordinary period of time. Then moving on to ultimately become the social secretary of the White House. And then coming back in the Obama administration as chief of protocol. Capricia, to borrow Lin-Manuel Miranda's phrase, clearly is someone who was in the room where it happened many, many, many times. And you get a sense of that from this wonderful book. And I know we'll get a sense of that this evening from some of the stories that you'll have to tell. I also want you to know, you talk about Washington. There was that, I guess Harry Truman made that famous line, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. He never met Capricia, because I have never met anybody who has more people who love and adore her than Ambassador Marshall. And I think you'll get a sense of why as we go through our conversation tonight. So Capricia, I assume are you in Washington now?
I am in Washington, D.C., lovely, humid, swampy Washington, D.C., for a variety of reasons. But I have to say this, Ambassador Emerson, there really is, there are definitely 2 people who have more folks who just adore them, and that certainly is you and your lovely wife. What you both did for our country during some challenging times in our relationship, our bilateral relationship with Germany, was nothing less than extraordinary. We all owe a debt of gratitude to you, most certainly, but I would include Kimberly in that as well. The 2 of you really forged some very strong relationships that we are hanging on to dearly even today as we navigate these murky global waters.
Well, I will definitely pass that on to her. She is in Berlin right now, where I hope to join her in about a week. So she could not tune into this because I think it's like 4 in the morning or something like that. But thank you for getting up late or staying up late in order to join us for today. So let's just start with talk about what your thought process was in terms of writing this book. And I agree with Bert. I think every business, every law firm, any organization, every nonprofit, that it deals with people, it deals with events, that has to really help teach people how to best understand their own and improve their own EQ, should buy this book and should absolutely read it. It should be must reading. But what was it that gave you the inspiration to write this in the first place?
Well, thank you for that. And I want to thank Bert so very much and Chevalier for inviting me into Los Angeles's oldest bookstore. Very excited to be a part of this community this evening. And he's right. Bert was actually quite right in the sense that the book was, the intention of writing the book really developed the moment that I left the White House. My last day, I will tell you about, was one that I'm not too proud of when I see President Obama, because I sobbed uncontrollably on his shoulder with my poor son watching. As I said, I just really don't want to go. I don't want to go. I loved my job. I really, really loved my job. And I loved serving him and Secretaries Clinton and Kerry. I really adored everything that protocol stood for and what we were able to do in forging those relationships around the world. But once I did leave and I stepped outside of the White House and into the private sector, I really noticed that people were having a difficult time in creating those critical connections. And for me, that was a big piece of business that I took care of, both as social secretary and as chief of protocol for Presidents Obama and President Clinton. And I thought back on the lessons that I had learned and the tools that I had developed, and I wanted to share those and really share them with those in the business community, as well as with people in their individual lives, how they could develop those relationships that really going to make a difference for them.
Well, you know, I wanted to take a minute and look at the appendix, but I honestly don't think there was a passage in there or advice on how best to cry on your boss's shoulder. But I completely understand where you were coming from, because when the Emerson family left our residence on that final day, which was the day that President Obama left and President Trump was inaugurated, it was a sob fest, let me tell you, you know, including our security detail even. It was just completely understand that. Well, let's, I think Bert really hit on an important point when he talked about, you know, preparation being so critical to this. But the flip side, of course, is preparation is critical. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that with a couple of examples. But the other piece is having the judgment and the flexibility to turn on a dime when something is going awry and basically pull it out of the fire. Perhaps you could share a couple of stories about those kinds of situations with us.
Well, yeah, but Bert is right. Preparation, planning, really key in protocol. You know, protocol creates a roadmap, if you will, for diplomacy. It helps our leaders, the president, secretaries of state, ambassadors, navigate the path of diplomacy so that they can avoid any pitfalls that will detract from their goal. And so planning and preparation is really, really critical. Planning can be influencing because you're designing the way that you want people to follow you. You want your counterpart to follow you. We were very deliberate in the methods that we use, but planning also, as you point out, allows you to be flexible because you can off-ramp when you need to, when things possibly don't go according to the plan, or you need to make a quick adjustment, but then you can easily on-ramp again, if you will, back onto the plan that was created. So I talk about you know, the first visit that I took with President Obama to China. And it was incredibly, as you can well imagine, really important visit for so many reasons. We're setting this relationship. These two global leaders are getting to know one another. It was at the invitation of President Hu, and the Chinese, very strict protocol. They adhered to incredibly strict protocol. The schedule is laid out in a certain manner, and we all are intended to follow it. So we arrive, we're a little jet lagged. We have the first evening, which is a private dinner that President Hu is hosting at the Diaotai. It is the Chinese Camp David, if you will. And beautiful, elegant, right in the heart of Beijing. And he is hosting him in Villa 18, very important villa. And the staff is crammed into this back room. As you know, we are usually at these very important events while they're happening at these elegant long tables. The presidents are seated along with the delegation. Suddenly my counterpart comes up to me and he says, "Oh, Ambassador Marshall, I have a very important question for you. President Hu would like President Obama to make a noodle." And I was like, "I'm so sorry, what?" And first of all, the fact that he is just asking for something out of the blue, you know, this isn't part of the plan. This wasn't part of the schedule. I was a little skeptical at first, but he was so insistent. And then I did think, you know, for the Chinese, this is very out of the norm. It must be really important to them. So he explained to me how he would make a noodle and what the significance of it was. So the staff, Valerie, everybody, they said, you think it's important? You go tell him. So I did. I walked over to the president, leaned in, said, "Mr. President, President Hu would like you to make a noodle." And he looked up to me with that like, what are you talking about? And he and I really didn't know very well at this point. This is my first trip with him. Big trip. Here we are in Asia. And I'm thinking, he's thinking, crazy lady. But instead, he knew I was coming over, giving my advice. Why was this important? And instead, he said, all right, great. Let's make a noodle. Stood up, shoulder to shoulder with President Hu, took this lump of dough in his hand and started to bounce it. And it started to create these long, thin noodles. And to the Chinese, this was so important at this moment because it signified the longevity of this relationship. Here we start, side by side with one another. And we are creating this relationship that will go long in time. And President Obama got that. I was very lucky that I get to work with presidents who really understood those cultural rituals, the significance of those cultural rituals, and how that set the tone to this very important relationship with President Hu for many years to come.
Sounds like we could do with making some more noodles.
I think we need to make a few noodles. Yeah.
Where we are today. You mentioned something that struck me about that the Chinese are very, very strict about their protocol. And my guess is you have gradations in countries. I know in Germany, you would think of the Germans as being very proper and very strict, but a lot of times things were just a lot more casual than I would have imagined, at least in terms of some of my dealings with some of the Germans. But one place that when I think of strict protocol that comes to mind is the United Kingdom, and in particular, Buckingham Palace. I remember I had the great good fortune to meet someone who, and I know you've met now several times, the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, and we were in the British ambassador's backyard, and we were instructed, you don't approach her. It was a garden party, and we were all sort of lined up in clusters. They put us in clusters. And as she walked through, she'd look and she'd nod, and then she'd sort of decide who she wanted to come and speak to. And we were instructed, you were supposed to say, and you tell me if I got this wrong, but you're supposed to say, Your Majesty. And my kids were mortified because the president of Germany directed her over to where we were. And I said, I called her ma'am. Oh, I first said Your Majesty, but then I called her ma'am. And my kids said that was like terrible, but
that's proper.
Is that proper? Oh, thank goodness. I'm going to tell them.
Absolutely.
I'm going to get out of the doghouse on that one. But I can imagine the level of anxiety. And of course, there was that very famous Barack and Michelle Obama first visit to Buckingham Palace, and the question of, do you put your hand on her back or whatever? Could you share a little bit of the inside story about that one?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I feel as though you go to Buckingham Palace, you're really going to the peaks of protocol. It's pretty extraordinary. And Her Majesty herself is really her own chief of protocol. It was wonderful to watch how she navigated everyone, and particularly the president. She would walk along with her watch, and she'd point to her watch, indicating to the president, it's time, Mr. President, move along, move along. And she just kept him moving. Everyone followed her, and she led, which was odd because, in the White House, I lead and the president follows me. But in Buckingham Palace, she leads and everyone else follows her. But the state visit was, it was just extraordinary, really extraordinary on so many levels. The arrival ceremony, I'm accustomed to the fact that when a woman has her handbag over her arm, that we are to offer to hold the handbag. So it was just myself and my counterpart in Buckingham Palace, but then and President Obama and Mrs. Obama, Her Majesty and Prince Philip standing there. They're about to exit onto the lawn for the arrival ceremony. And I said, oh, Her Majesty's handbag. And I took a slight step forward, and my counterpart pushes me back against the wall. It's like, do not touch the bag. I said, oh my goodness, Bishop, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. He goes, we never touched the bag. And I said, well, what's in the bag? We don't know what's in the bag, but we don't touch the bag. Someone later told me that they thought that she had her mobile phone in it so that she can call her grandchildren. But after the arrival ceremony, we quickly move up to these amazing rooms where there is a delegation luncheon and then the display of the gifts. In most countries, the gift exchange is from protocol to protocol. Only on very special occasions will there be a leader-to-leader exchange, which is public. Her Majesty always likes her gift exchanges open and leader-to-leader. So we have to arrange the gifts on these very long tables that have been draped in white tablecloths. The doors open up, Her Majesty walks, oh, come along, Mr. President, come along. And we were really nervous about this gift because the first gift, I was not chef of protocol at the time, but the first gift that had been selected to give to Her Majesty was an iPod, and didn't go over quite well for a variety of reasons.
How come? Why not?
The first gift generally between leaders should be something very impersonal. It should not be, you don't know one another very well at this point. And so it should be a let's get to know each other sort of gift. On top of that, apparently also the device was created for an American outlet, not a UK outlet. And so, yeah, she, I guess, would have to get an adapter or something, had to be changed. There were just, but what it did, regrettably, was divert away from the engagement, the attention. And so now there's this huge expectation on this occasion. What will those Americans bring? You know, they're all just dying to know. So you have to make sure that you hit the right tone in the gift and that it's not going to deviate away from the work at hand between the president and Her Majesty. And so we did loads of research. Of course, we called Ambassador Sussman, you know him well. We spoke at length with the embassy in DC to Sir Nigel and others, and learned so much about Her Majesty and that she just really revered the relationship with her father. So we created a leather portfolio, and in that we had found unique memorabilia from her father's last visit to the United States. Well, she loves her archives. It's a big piece of her, of the visit itself, of the official visit. She makes sure that you go on a tour of the archives so she can show those relationships. And she starts paging through the portfolio. And I want to say that when she looked up to President Obama, I saw a slight tear in her eye. And oh, thank you so very much. President Obama looks at me, good job. Okay, you're doing great here.
I made up for the noodle.
So then he says, Her Majesty says, oh, and look what they got your ponies, Philip. So Prince Philip, we created for him a bits and shanks. He likes to race carriage ponies, and we put the president's seal on the ends, and he walks up, and at first he's a little skeptical. I don't know about these. And then she calls over this tall man who's like the head of the horses or something. And so he walks over and says, oh, no, Your Majesty, this is fine workmanship, fine. And she's, I told you, Philip. And then we gave Prince Charles this wonderful box that was created from a tree that had fallen on the South Lawn, magnolia wood. And in it, we put saplings from Mount Vernon and Monticello and the White House, because he's an environmentalist. Well, he just loved it. Oh, he was thrilled. And then we put some White House honey in it. He says, oh, I have some honey. And then Prince Philip says he had some honey, and there was a little bit of a honey off that went on. But I'll tell you, Ambassador Emerson, that, and I think you know this well too, that shortly thereafter, on the television, it was Americans Get It Right, Her Majesty Pleased with Gifts. And at that moment, that special relationship was created. There was a stronger bond that was made. And that's what you want to use with so many of these soft power tools, gifts, food, all of those we use throughout our engagements to enhance the discussions, often tough discussions, that the president was having around the world with his counterparts. And on this occasion, it really did work. It really did help. The touching of the back and those sort of distractions, I call them, really, it didn't affect the relationship. Her Majesty truly, most sincerely, was very fond of the president and Mrs. Obama. And those protocol expectations were sort of brushed aside by her. And they're there to just give guidance on certain occasions. But if she were offended, she certainly would have let you know that.
Well, you know, what's interesting is when you talk about the headlines, and I remember this of, you know, the Americans get it right. It is interesting how a major protocol snafu can completely ruin a trip. Even it may be a 3-day trip to a country or a 2-day trip to a country with multiple meetings and public events and so on and so forth. But invariably, unfortunately, the press and others are going to focus on, you know, those particular things. I would think on one level, you know, it would be quite stressful to be doing this. Yet, having watched you in that job, you just seem to kind of float through it with such ease and grace. I mean, you know, was it like, you know, people joke about the duck, you know, that is just gliding along the surface and then the feet are going like that. Is that kind of how you felt in the inside when you're doing these things?
24/7, all the time. And if I didn't have the butterflies in the belly, something was not going right.
Yeah, exactly. It's what makes you sharper. You know, I think people would be interested to hear about some of the nuances to that end, since we're sort of on the topic of doing things right or maybe not doing them right. When you think about, you talked about gifts, obviously, but you think about handshakes, when you think about dressing, what kind of clothes to wear, when you think about colors, which is, you know, I was fortunate to be involved in another one of these with you, and that just struck me, the fact that you have to worry about what colors to wear and present, or even have the table decorated in. Give some insights in terms of all that, and that incredible level of detail you have to pay attention to.
Well, as I'd like to think of protocol as a bit of a superpower, because it's those nuances, as you were saying, John, the micro details that can really create a major impact. We were charged with making sure we did all of our research. We spoke to the ambassador in post. We spoke to the embassy here. We contacted many experts before we drafted what we called them culture memos. And this was the advice that we gave to the president and the delegation that was traveling with him on every moment of the trip, what they were to wear, cultural greetings, differences, traditions that needed to be adhered to, religious significance of certain buildings or mannerisms or sects of people that we needed to make sure that they were aware, how, if they didn't shake their hand, why that what might be the case. We just always wanted to make sure that the president was, of course, fully informed, and knowing it also is it's a power pivot. You know, when the president walked into a room and Mrs. Obama, and they're adorned in a color that is seen with great pride and reverence in a country, it takes them aback for just a moment. And you see that, and they're pleased by that. It's a gesture of kindness and respect. And that goes a long way in diplomacy, and it goes a long way in any development of any relationship between people. You know well that diplomacy is a long game, and you want to invest in that relationship. So every moment that you can take to really invest in that relationship, so that you are eventually building up a bond of trust, where you can then easily conduct your the business at hand, is our goal. That is really the goal of diplomats. So having that moment of reverence, of respect, so very important. Giving the appropriate gift. Again, just truly really important. How you greet someone, knowing that is a namaste in certain countries, or we don't bow. We certainly never bow. Our president doesn't, but a nod of the head in reverence to their flag, or there's so many ways in which we can do that. And so sharpening your cultural IQ, understanding, who they are, and one tool that very, very well, that President Clinton, a characteristic of his, a trait of his that was so important in his presidency, empathy. He truly understood the capacity to put himself into the position of others. And in particularly when he was traveling, he knew, here I am, the president of the United States. It carries a lot of weight, it carries a lot of significance. But there's always that moment that he would refer to someone's family or someone's country or something that happened in that moment, that person felt the empathy. They felt the camaraderie, and then it creates that collaboration, that connection that you're looking for. All of those are so important, and they are those nuances, those micro moments that can happen, but that create that long major impact.
Well, and particularly speaking about empathy, I think that this is sort of a good follow-on. But as the father of 3 girls, I was fascinated by the chapter on, and I want to make sure all 3 girls read it, negotiating while female. And so you were a female ambassador, chief of protocol. You were working for a long period of time, obviously, with both the First Lady and then ultimately the female Secretary of State. And we may, have a female vice president. So, it would be, I think it would be really interesting for the audience to hear some of your thoughts about that. I mean, how is it different for women? In more particular, how does a woman overcome some of the, sort of the biases that she might encounter, cultural biases and otherwise, in the course of doing this important work?
Such a great question, and I'm glad that you brought up that chapter. You have 3 amazing daughters. I know that they're going to continue to light the world on fire because they've already started. Women are, while writing this book, I of course wrote it for both men and women. But near the end, I realized that there was just a few of these tools that would effectively help women in particularly. Women are always in a state of negotiation, if you will, constantly bridging and persuading in this male-dominated world. But what I wanted to communicate to women as I travel in particular is how to adopt an equalizing mindset. What are some of these tools that can help you navigate issues that we face because of our sex, in particularly in business? And I reinforce the importance of raising your own personal cultural IQ when it comes to gender, understanding when you're traveling somewhere that there more than likely will be an expectation of a certain attire. In greetings, how are women and how do men and women greet one another? How do they interact with one another? But you don't want to delegate away your power. If you are the head of that organization, that company, the group, make sure that your standing is well known. Make sure that you are seated at the center of the table. You may need to cover your head, but you're seated at the center of the table, that you are the one that is addressing them first at the podium. It's really important to make sure that they know your worth and that you, of course, know your own personal worth. I was very lucky to have been mentored by an extraordinary person very early on in my career, and Secretary Clinton. She has mentored now hundreds of women, and she continues to be my mentor. But she was the first one who really reinforced this equalizing mindset. And I recall in the Clinton White House, I went to her and a group of us. There was the Hillary land, John, and this is what her staff was fondly referred to, sitting at the scheduling table, and we were complaining. Sometimes when we would sit around in these meetings in the White House, and there was only 2 women and there's 8 men, sometimes they didn't hear us. I would say something, and then the guy Harry sitting next to me would say the exact same thing, and everyone would go, "Great idea, Harry! Wow, super idea!" And I'd be like, "Did I just imagine that I said? I could have sworn I said that." And she then said to us, "Repeat what each other says all of the time. Continue to echo what the other says in these meetings. So if Sally has a great idea, Capricia, you say, 'Great idea, Sally. Hey, did everybody hear Sally's idea? Sally, will you repeat your idea again? That's such a super idea.'" And so then it really is heard. Now, there's a variety of different reasons. Perhaps we are soft-spoken. Perhaps, and that's another thing that I talk about with women, is that we often use vocal fry and it doesn't come out so clearly. So, you have to talk, you have to really focus on your tone. But that's really important. And so it worked. It's a technique that really worked. She also created an environment for us so that early on in our tenures, many of us were having children. I had my son in the White House, and just created an environment for us to raise our children and also continue on with our work. And I really enforce in this book that finding a great place that understands, a great workplace that has a network for you, that has an environment for you, that allows you to not feel as though you have to give up one or the other, is super important.
Yeah, that's great. Very, very helpful. We have a question on the chat from Sergio. Any tips on how to recover from a protocol mishap? How do you salvage a situation like that? Maybe you could give us an example as well, although I'm sure there were no mishaps that occurred under your watch. I mean, can't imagine that.
Never. What happens behind the curtain, in the great land of Oz. No, I actually had one that I will share with you, Sergio. First of all, own it. Just own it. First and foremost, that I believe is, will help you move the situation along. When I was at the UN General Assembly, this wonderful ritual that we have to go through every year. We used to, they're not doing it this year. All the global leaders gather in New York, and President Obama, Secretary Clinton would go up and have bilateral after bilateral, incredibly busy time. This one year, President Obama decided to test us even more and to hold the ASEAN summit there as well. And so our team was really busy. I think I was sleeping maybe 2 to 3 hours a night, if that. And we were all just around the clock. And on this one occasion, the team delegated our responsibility of hanging the flags to one of the advanced folks who was on the team at the time. And we are professionals in hanging flags, and we know how important they are. They're a very, very important symbol for every country. And just as I had escorted all the leaders out and they were announced and they're now seated in front of their flags, I received word from another protocol officer that we have a very big problem. The flag of the Philippines had been inadvertently hung upside down. And so not only was it hung inappropriately, but in addition to that, the manner in which it was hung signaled that the Philippines was at war, which of course it wasn't. And in addition to it as well, I was unaware that immediately after the summit, President Obama had a very important question for President Aquino and wanted to do that privately. So there was a real problem at hand. When it happened, I said, okay, let's A, fix it. Let's immediately fix the flag. B, I have to go personally and apologize. I wasn't going to drag up the advanced person, not their fault. I should have been the last two eyes that looked at that flag and made sure that it was hung appropriately. And so I went immediately to the ambassador and I apologized profusely, accepting responsibility myself, and asked what I could possibly do to assist in moving the situation along, to, of course, apologize as well to President Aquino. And he said, it's fine. But I knew that I had to put something out on paper as well. And so we drafted a quick statement. We got that out. Seemed to calm the fires because it was very fast. It was becoming a pretty bad situation. But there was one last person I needed to then apologize to, and that, of course, was President Obama. So the event was over. President Obama comes backstage, and you know how we hang those blue curtains, and so the pipe and drape, and he's standing behind it, and I make my way over there. And even though I was wearing 3-inch heels, I still had to kind of look up, and he's looking down at me, and he asked me what happened. I explained fully, and then told him what we had done in the aftermath. And he said, all right, Capricia. He goes, okay, I think that we did the best that we can do for now, but not going to happen again, right? And I said, no, sir, it's not. And it thankfully never did again, but owning it was very important.
That's a great piece of advice. And let me also just remind people, we have the link where you can buy the book right here on the Zoom group chat. And of course, we'll be sending this out again to everybody who's on the Chevalier's mailing list. And also feel free to do the raise your hand function, in which case Teresa will find your question and pass it along to us, or just type it on the Zoom chat as well. And now we have another question that just popped up from Bob Wolf. I believe that is, yes. Bob Wolf, how are you? Just wondered whether Ambassador Marshall remembers what gift Queen Elizabeth gave to the Obamas during their visit, and how important in protocol is the manner in which one accepts a gift?
Ah, yes, very important. Okay, so Her Majesty gave letters from previous presidents, and that she had collected. So it was a lovely gift. Also in a portfolio, a leather portfolio. So I was wondering, perhaps someone. No, I'm kidding.
They took your idea.
Lovely gift. It was a lovely gift. And but the manner in which is very, very important. Depending upon what your intention is, making sure that the gift was accepted. That's why it's so important that we have our rules and guidelines in government. There are limits to the valuation of a gift that a government employee can accept, but we must accept the gift, and protocol does that on behalf of the president to accept the gift. We then give it on over to professionals who will determine a valuation, and then determine whether or not the president could keep it personally, or if it was over the value, then we would have to go to GSA, or he had the opportunity to purchase it. Those are some sticky situations, because oftentimes leaders want to see their gift either on display, or if it was a beautiful piece of jewelry. The Saudis would give, just suitcases of jewelry. Well, they couldn't keep that. That would be highly inappropriate. And so those would certainly go off to the archives, but you couldn't return the gift, because that would be the greatest of insults. One time we received in Tanzania this very tall, just huge carving, beautiful, beautiful carving, the Tree of Life. And President Obama just loved it. But the ambassador said, there's no way we can get that home. Plain people said, no way we can get that back home. I'm like, well, I'm not leaving it here. We're going to figure out how we're going to get that home. But at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was in a pickup truck back on over to the presidential palace, loading this big long tray up, wrapping it, and then putting it in the conference room on Air Force One so that it would make its way back to the United States. So it's really important the manner in which we receive those gifts.
Oh, that's unbelievable. Well, I'll tell you, as ambassador, we didn't have necessarily an archive or a future ambassadorial library where a lot of the gifts could come. And I remember there were a couple of things that were given that were clearly way beyond, the, what is it, $12 limit or $22 limit? Like you can get a donut, that's it. And but also it was an item of clothing for my wife, and it was clearly and it was given by a very, very important German figure who was a billionaire, head of one of the major publishing families in Germany, actually globally. And there was no way we could return that back. And I'll tell you, the back and forth with L, the legal group in state, was just ridiculous. And so finally they agreed that we didn't have to return it, but we would just keep it in the embassy, even though it wasn't something that would necessarily go on display. And damned if when he went into the closet where he was going to put it, there wasn't another one sitting there, which had obviously been given to Tammy Murphy, Phil Murphy, my predecessor's wife. So we're building a collection there in the German embassy. But yeah, the whole gift thing is, and I can also remember the consternation, the discussion back and forth over what appropriate gift to give to Angela Merkel. Well, we have another question from Brad Bryan. Brad's the managing partner of one of the most important law firms in the country. And Brad, do you want to unmute yourself? You didn't tell us what you want.
I think I'm unmuted. My question, and thank you, ambassadors, both of you, for doing this. It's great. My question is, has there been a diminution of protocol more generally? And I'm a lawyer, and I think about judges and court systems, and Judge Swain would have some thoughts on this. But to me, protocol is very, very important for maintaining the seriousness of our institutions and in a democracy. And I just wanted you to comment on whether you think more generally there's been a diminution, and what do we do to preserve it? Because I, for one, think it's critical.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yes, I do believe that there has been, but interestingly enough, during this time of the pandemic, people are seeking out guidance on how to behave. How do I conduct myself? What are those social codes of conduct? I'm at a loss, and I'm excited because I think this might be a moment in which we can inject again the real importance of protocol, why we need to have these standards, why these guidelines matter, how they can assist people in navigating sticky situations, getting them through the fog of a time like this where they're just not sure what to do. How many people am I allowed to have in my house? How do I serve people? So, etiquette and protocol kind of attach to one another in a most interesting way. I like to say that they're fine, firm cousins. But I agree with you, Brett. Over time, the relaxation of those office norms of behavior and attire really has led to this now. I believe in society, the manner in which we conduct ourselves is so often lacking in civility, and so we need to build that back up again. There has to be an expectation of appropriate conduct and manner in which you engage. So I'm hopeful that this time really is one that will reinforce the importance of it again.
I think that's a great point and a great question as well. And I completely agree. And it just strikes me that at a time when we're obviously globalization is here to stay, and it just is increasing, notwithstanding the gravitational pull of nationalism that we've seen recently, in part because of COVID and other things. But you sort of need these rules of the road to help navigate. So it is a shame. I was actually had a similar question I was going to ask myself, because I think that is such an important aspect of this time. Okay, we got several other questions for you. From Nathan, in your experience, which countries place the highest importance on protocol and which ones place the least? And can you give an example of one or the other?
Well, I would have to. Hello, Nathan. Thank you for the question. I would have to again state that the Chinese adhered to, and they still adhere to, a very high level of protocol, strict protocol, but in the sense that the rule is the rule is the rule. And there is no deviation from the rule. Although I had a wonderful counterpart that I worked with, and he and I would get the requests from both of our countries and kind of go off to the side and negotiate between the two of us. They said, okay, if I give you 2 more people at the table, will you please have the meeting closer to my president's suite, because he really doesn't want to walk all that way. And we were able to sort of do those backroom dealings between the two of us. So he was a little flexible in some of the issues of protocol, but they adhere to it the most. And regrettably, I just most sincerely have to say that currently the rules of protocol in the United States have become incredibly relaxed. There is and this is just outsider viewpoint, in the same vein that all of you are watching it happen, a salute to a general of a country that we do not even recognize is just, it was jaw-dropping for me. Walking ahead of leaders and not side by side. Those moments when you ignore protocol can create chaos and oftentimes the perception that you are sending a signal, that they think that you really are signifying that this relationship is one that you don't value, or that you're trying to perhaps insert some mischief. Everything is watched, every move, in particularly those moves of the United States, the United States president. Very, very important. They are truly examined. And so it hurts me to say that, but I regrettably sense that is the case today.
Well, there are 2 maybe somewhat tongue-in-cheek questions that came in along those lines. One is, did either of the presidents who you worked for ever remove art from the U.S. embassies to the White House? And then the second question, which, and that was from Bert, and the second question from Claire Spiegelbryan is, who's the head of protocol in the Trump White House, and how does he or she do her job with the current president? Which I would also take as, that's gotta be a tough one.
It is. So to answer the first, I'm a little confused by it, because.
Oh, well, there was a little piece in the newspapers the last day or two that apparently when President Trump was in France and decided not to go to the commemoration at the gravesite of soldiers because of the rain, he spent 6 hours in the embassy in France, would place you've been to, or the residence, sorry, you've been to many times. And I like this bust, and wow, that's a great painting. And look at that sculpture over there, loaded up, put on Air Force One, and moved. I guess the jaw drop answers that question.
I can't
I
imagine.
I think we have an answer to that question. literally broke in the last day or two in the news.
Wow, I miss that. I miss that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fun one. And by the way, they talk, and you'll appreciate this, but the article talked about the Office of Building Organization and State Department and emails going back and forth frantically. What do we do here? You know, OBO is the acronym for that. And no, I can imagine. I can just imagine how that created all sorts of histrionics. But what about?
Right? I mean, FAPE puts a lot of art in that's Ron Perlman. I can't imagine.
Well, there are a lot of, I'll tell you what, the FAPE is fantastic. I mean, and the money that's donated for the art for these embassies, and it is an art in embassies program. It's not an art in the White House program, but there's a separate thing for that. But here's the second question, Claire's question though, about, I would imagine, I would hope that your successors would always be reaching out to you. And I know that Jeremy Bernard told me there's a nice sort of group of past social secretaries. But on the protocol side, I would just imagine that it would be challenging, and you obviously don't give away anything inappropriate on this if your successor shared this with you, but it must be awfully challenging to try to get this particular president to follow different rules of protocol. He's a disruptor. That's why people who love him love him. Have you anything you can share with us on that?
Yes, very similar. I'm very lucky in the sense that I have two groups that I am closely connected to, the former social secretaries and the former chiefs of protocol. And when we could gather, we would gather and share best practices with one another. It was wonderful, really, really wonderful to hear from your predecessors on their oopsie doodles, and also the funny things that would happen. There's a great social secretary by the name of Bess Abel. Her husband, Tyler, was chief of protocol when she was social secretary. This is a fantastic couple.
Oh, that's great.
Really amazing. And they both work for Johnson. Well, you know, Mrs. Johnson created the China, and the first round of China that arrived, the prints on it just wasn't done quite right. This is by Lennox. She and her husband, she tells this story, it's fantastic, went into the bowels of the White House with a pitcher of margaritas and just started throwing the China against a wall because they never wanted it to see the light of day. President Johnson didn't want Mrs. Johnson to be upset by it. So we do have a wonderful group, and we did ask the first chief of protocol, they are on now their second chief of protocol, to attend a luncheon, and the chief of protocol, you know, Lloyd Hand, who also was a Johnson chief of protocol, Carter's chief of protocol, myself, the Bushes, there were so many, Reagan's chief, everyone was gathered. And you know, Lucky Roosevelt, she served President Reagan for almost 8 years.
Sure.
Gathered around this table to share, you know, a lot of, I mean, just years and years of information and best practices. And, you know, what we believe is you can give the best advice and you can try all that you can and write as many memos, but unless the advice is taken or they follow your heat. And that's where I was lucky. And I was stating that with Presidents Clinton and Obama, they turned to me before they walked into a room. They gave me, I was the last person they spoke to. They gave me that 3-4 minutes, said, okay, Capricia, go. They knew that they didn't want a gesture, a statement, an eye flinch to make any difference in the moment that they were about to have with their counterpart on the global stage. They wanted to make sure that they got it right. And also, in many cases, again, to sort of shift that, the power, in that it would give them a bit of a lift in the relationship. What is this about, this, discussion or engagement that I'm about to have, that where I can make a bit of a difference. And that was an honor to serve them in that way. I couldn't imagine working for someone who completely dismissed all of it and found it perhaps irrelevant or silly, because they're not only hurting their own ability to achieve their goal, but they're certainly, of course, as they represent our country, hurting our country as well.
John, last question, and I think we should let Ambassador Marshall at 11 o'clock at night call it an evening. So I see one of your former colleagues has a question up. Maybe you could ask that, and then we'll let Ambassador Marshall go to bed.
And from Gretchen, hi, Ambassador Marshall. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. I worked for Ambassador Emerson in Germany. Thank you very much for sharing the link to this event. Thank you for tuning in. That's wonderful. And wondered if there was anything you wish those of us career folks supporting high-level visits overseas or in Washington knew. Anything that you wish that the career people would know. And were there things that you found yourself having to explain over and over and over again? Gretchen, that's why we got this book. And we had excellent leadership on these visits in Mission Germany, which I would absolutely agree with. I think everything went beautifully. We had a G7, we had a G20, but I might not be so lucky in future assignments. Oh, that's great. I brought your book, and I bought your book, and we'll read it shortly, but would welcome any insight. In the meantime, thank you very much. What a lovely note.
Well, Gretchen, I should say that I was going to answer the last, and I neglected to add on this bit because I fear that I just chat too long. But I will state this, that I am indebted to you and to your colleagues. It is the career officers, the foreign service officers, who are the backbone of the State Department, of our diplomacy, the continuity from one administration to the next. And I learn so very much every day from those who had served before. And even if there are, and I believe there are not, people in the Office of Protocol who are not advising well, I believe that they all are trying very, very hard, but they're completely dependent upon the amazing public servants who have been there, some of them for 30 years in service to country, and have done a spectacular, spectacular job. So I always found that every day I was learning from them and heeding their warnings, because oftentimes, been there, done that. Let me tell you how this is going to roll. And so they would prevent me from going down a bad path. But I became closest of friends to many of them. I have 3 godchildren now from my time in the office, and relish the relationships and friendships that I was able to develop with these really, truly extraordinary people. So thank you, Gretchen, so very, very much for everything that you did throughout your time.
So that's a wonderful way to wrap it up and throw it back to you, Bert.
I was going to say, so really the thanks this evening are owed to Ambassador Marshall, Ambassador Emerson. This book has to be purchased and must be read and reread. It has all the rules of the road that you'll need, and your children will need, and your friends' children will need to navigate a successful, joyous life. Thank you all for being here. This was really a special evening. I feel so enlightened and excited for the evening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Emerson.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Everybody. Bye-bye, everybody.